You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Kari Bovee.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. We've got a fantastic show for you today. But before we get into that, I'd like to tell you about a couple of sponsors who make the show possible each and every day. Craig Allenson has a brand new book. It's a spinoff of the Expeditionary Force series, Expeditionary Force Mavericks, Book 1, Death Trap. The human soldiers stranded on the planet Paradise have been recruited into an alien legion to do the dirty jobs that the high-tech species won't do. Their first mission is to kick the enemy off a backwater planet no one cares about. It's a simple assignment, except everyone has a hidden agenda, and the planet could become a death trap. Craig Allenson's brand new book, Death Trap. Also thanks to Ernie Lindsay with his Sarah series, the psychological thriller series that begins with Sarah, has books 1 through 3 and a bonus novella, Single Mother, Successful Executive, Target for Revenge. The psychological thriller series box set Sarah Winthrop's world is thrown headlong into a whirlwind of chaos along with her family, friends, and colleagues by unseen enemies seeking revenge. Those lurking in the shadows, clawing for vengeance, will go to any lengths. Any lengths. It's likely never occurred to them that they may have just messed with the wrong woman. The Sarah series, books 1 through 3 and a bonus novella by Ernie Lindsay. Also, John L. Monk with the Jenkins Cycle. From Book 1, Kick, a supernatural thriller. They say suicides are damned for eternity, but if possessing the bodies of violent criminals is hell, then Dan Jenkins will take it, and he does, every time a portal arrives to whisk him from his ghostly exile. Normally, before the villain returns to kick him out, Dan dishes out a final serving of justice and leaves the world a safer place. It's one of the rules if he wants more rides, and he's happy to oblige. For a part-time dead guy, it's a pretty good gig. And then he meets her. Kick is the first book in a series of supernatural thrillers. If you like Quantum Leap and Everyday, you'll love this gritty and original take on the body-hopping hero story. Vividly written, Kick is a wild ride with a sharp, sarcastic wit and a flawed, yet likable main character. From John L. Monk, The Jenkins Cycle, Book 1, Kick. And from M.D. Massey, Invasion, Zombie Apocalypse. The action-packed first novel in M.D. Massey's Them, Zombie Apocalypse series. When a surprise nuclear attack forces Aiden from hiding, he finds the world to be a much different place and more deadly. Now he'll traverse a post-apocalyptic landscape populated by violent redneck looters, rogue military factions, and an army of hungry undead. After 2 combat tours in the Middle East, Aiden Sullivan just wants to be left alone on his family's ranch in the Texas Hill Country. But when the bombs fall and the dead walk, Aiden risks life and limb to rescue his aging parents from the zombie horde. To save them, he'll traverse half the state of Texas while fighting rogue military units, violent redneck looters, and thousands of walking dead. The question is, can he make it there in time? Only one thing's for sure, this ranger will complete the mission or he'll die trying. M.D. Massey's Invasion, Zombie Apocalypse. Now on to our show. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Kari Bovee on the show with me today. She has a fantastic series called the Annie Oakley Mystery series, and the new book, Peccadillo at the Palace, is out everywhere now when you're hearing this. And I think you guys are really going to love this series and the new book. Welcome to the show, Kari.
Thank you, Hank. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, thanks. We begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, gosh, that goes way back. I started writing stories when I was in the 3rd grade. I found that it was just a great way to kind of get lost in my imagination, and I really I really liked being there, and I liked the act of writing, actually, pen to paper, pencil to paper writing. And so it was quite young.
Nice. Were you a big reader?
Yes, I was. I read quite a bit. My dad traveled a lot, and so every time he came home from a business trip, he would bring me a book. And sometimes it was like a little series, or sometimes it was a book maybe on, art history or something like that. So, yeah, I read a lot.
Nice. Did your parents notice this knack for writing that you had? Did they recognize the gift, if you will?
I think I don't know if they recognized the gift so much as the interest. Yeah. I remember I went through a pile of my old report cards, and one of my teachers, and I think it was in the third grade, said, Kari really likes to write stories. So I think they've known all along that and I always had a journal. I was always writing. I asked for, I think when I don't remember how old I was, again, quite young, about the age of 10 or under, I asked for a typewriter for Christmas, and I got it. And one of those old plastic Corona, Corona things, it was turquoise or something like that. And I had that forever. I think I basically wore it out.
Oh, I love that. There's something so visceral about writing with a typewriter or even writing longhand. It's becoming less and less of a thing. The carrying a journal and having a pen or a pencil that you really love, there's something that connects you to the words in some strange way.
I agree, and it sort of slows you down. Yeah. So that your thoughts aren't racing when you're trying to, I do write on the computer most of the time, but if I'm stuck, I will write longhand and just kind of, just take a step back, take a breath, and, try to work it out on, with pen and paper.
Yeah. A lot of people have the desire to write, have an idea that they would like to be a storyteller, and then most of us get sidetracked by life and have to find a career, and we start a family and all of this sort of stuff, and then writing kind of comes back to us. It sounds like that you have always wanted to be a writer. That's something that you've always kind of had an eye on. Did you study writing in college?
I did. It took a little bit of, I loved in high school, I loved writing papers. I wrote a lot of poetry. Again, I journaled a lot. But when I got to college, for some reason, I thought I needed to major in something like, business or accounting or, and I tried a few majors, and my counselor, who was one of my English professors, finally sat me down and said, listen, you're an English major. You need to just kind of get over yourself and embrace it. You're an English major. You love reading. You love writing. And so then he sort of got me on that path of getting the writing bug. So I decided to go full bore with this and finagled my coursework so that I could have basically a free year, a free semester in my senior year. And I had 3 independent studies, and they were all writing. And so it was just me and a professor. One of them was short story writing, one of them was screenwriting, and I think I did a playwriting independent study, which was so fabulous because I had my own schedule. I didn't have to be on, anyone else's schedule, and I met with my professor every couple of days, and we just, worked through these different projects that I had.
That is amazing. That conversation you had with your advisor, your professor, when he said that you are an English major, can get over yourself. You said that you felt like you needed to do something more practical in the beginning. What was the thing that what was his answer for that? That you want to be an English major? Now, what can you do with that? Or did he even have to convince you that this was a practical thing that you could do?
Well, after he told me that I really needed to major in English, he proceeded to tell me I'd never make much money. So I kind
love
of
it.
had to get used to that idea. But he said, I think the whole premise was, if you're going to do something, do it well. And
Yeah.
you have kind of a propensity towards this, so go for it and do it well. And he said there's, you can teach, you can do freelance writing. And so, when I got out of college, I actually got a job as a technical writer at a Fortune 500, IT company, and which was, for a creative writer, it was kind of soul-sucking, but I learned a lot, and I learned to be very expedient with my words and economical with my words. And from that, I sort of developed a clean style. I don't have a lot of flowery prose and things like that. I like to write description, but I try to keep it simple. And I think, those few years of having to be very precise with my wording really helped.
It's so funny when it seems at the moment when you're in the midst of some of those things that they are completely soul-sucking. And then you look back and realize that it was a tool for your toolkit, that, we don't want to go back to it, but really happy for the experience,
Right.
that it did add something.
While I was in it, it was terrible. I mean, one of the projects I had was writing a manual on teleconferencing. I mean, it was just so boring. But, I did it, and it was experience. And then I went on and did some freelance writing for some magazines and things like that. But, so I've kind of done it all.
Yeah. When did the tide turn and you began writing for yourself again?
I think it was when I was a young mother, and I had made the decision, my husband and I had made the decision that I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And I don't regret that for one single second. But while I was in it, I was just craving an intellectual outlet. And I had always done, I had always written, I had always journaled, but I wanted to do something more. And it was at that point I thought, I'm going to try to write a novel. And so when the kids were down for a nap or, when they went to bed, that's when I started.
Did you find the old Smith Corona typewriter and?
No, I actually had a computer and a word processor or something. I don't even remember. That's a good question. I did a lot of writing longhand,
Yeah.
back then.
So what was the idea? What was the story idea that started coming out there?
Well, I wrote a story on a sort of a religious cult, and I thought it was really sort of an interesting topic that I was looking into. And so it was a mystery, and I joined a group of writers. It was actually a woman who was teaching writing out of her home. She was published. She was pretty well published, and she was also a script doctor. And so I really felt like she had some good qualifications. And so I started going to her courses every week. We met every week and sort of started writing this novel. And I forget what the question was.
What was that idea, that story idea that you started working on?
Oh, right. And so it was about a group of religious people that's a sort of a spin-off of the Catholic Church. And I started writing about that, and it was kind of the whole premise of the idea was what would happen, which has happened, but what would happen if people who were worshiping in the name of God, it suddenly turned evil, and it completely turned over on itself. What if the wrong person got in there and was leading the group, and all of a sudden people were sucked into that person's way of thinking, and they think that they're doing the right thing, but it's not the right thing. And that book is actually, I'm going to be putting that book out probably next year. I'm not making any promises, but it's been one of those things where I just can't get away from it. I loved the story so much, but the writing wasn't quite there. So I've been working on it, tinkering with it for a long time. And there was actually 2 books. It was a series, and I had written 2 of the books and had outlined the third. So hopefully that will come out in the near future.
Nice. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Where does your love of mystery come from?
I think it's because I just love reading them and I love watching them. I watch the BBC, PBS mystery series, all of them. I've watched them all. And I just like the idea of the puzzle, of trying to figure out, who did it, what their motivation was. That was a big thing, was what motivates people to do the things that they do. And I find it really fascinating because it seems so psychological, people's reasons. They have reasons in their past, things that have happened to them that have made them, commit crimes. And what is the reasoning behind that? Where does it come from? And then, of course, the amateur sleuth or the detective comes in and tries to make order out of this chaos and is seeking justice and seeking the truth. And I just like that whole scenario. And I like creating the puzzle, and I like solving the puzzle.
Gotcha.
So I guess that's where it stems from.
Yeah. Me too. There's something about unraveling the deeper story. We see the thing on the surface, and what's really going on underneath makes us love his mystery so much. After writing that first book or working on it, what was the first thing that you had published?
Well, the first thing that I had published was I had self-published that book a long time ago, the first one that I had talked to you about. And but that was before self-publishing took off or anything, and I didn't know what I was doing. So it basically was just for family and friends. And then it wasn't until 2018 with Girl with a Gun that I was, officially published my debut, So it took a long time. I did take quite a bit of time off of writing when the kids were growing up, just because my husband traveled quite a bit and it was overwhelming.
Sure.
And so I turned my attention to other things. So I took about a 15-year hiatus and then came back to it when my youngest was a junior in high school, and just sort of went into it, jumped in again with both feet, and was working on Girl with a Gun and got it published last year.
Well, Girl with a Gun is the first in this series, and the second one is Peccadillo at the Palace that we mentioned earlier. Tell us where this story comes from, and this is full of characters that we will recognize. Tell me where the idea for this series came from.
Well, it came from a lot of things. One was I was reading a series of books by Stephanie Barron, and they were Jane Austen mysteries. And so she had made an amateur sleuth out of Jane Austen, and I thought it was such a fascinating idea to take a real person in history and fictionalize, events that happened to them, and while using the same, the historical context. So of what really was going on. And so I read those, and then there was another series of books by, I think it was Karen Harper, where she took Queen Elizabeth the first, and created a mystery series. I think there was 3 or 4 books. And I thought that was really great. And so when I started looking into Annie Oakley, I thought she would make a fantastic amateur sleuth, and I had pretty much, everyone has heard of Annie Oakley, but I didn't know really what an incredible woman she was until I watched a PBS, I watch a lot of PBS American Experience special on her. And she was just an amazing person, and she had some hardships in her life, but she had this incredible talent. And one of the things that really motivated me to write about her was she was a woman who was trying to help her family and make a living, basically doing a man's job. And she was really, really good at shooting. She developed this reputation in her county for being one of the best shot in Darke County, Ohio, because she would use a shotgun to shoot birds, and her aim was so good she could hit the birds in the back of the head so that there was no shot in the meat. So she started selling to the mercantile, and she developed this reputation of being a really good shot. And so she was encouraged by family and friends to go to a shooting contest I think it was in Cincinnati. In my book, it takes place in Greenville. I've altered some things just for the sake of the story, but she ended up going to this shooting contest, shooting against Frank Butler, who eventually became her husband, and she just amazed everybody, and she beat him in the contest, and instead of, getting all upset by this 15-year-old girl, cleaning his clock, he fell madly in love with her. And I just thought it was such a great story. And I have changed a few things. I don't stick exactly with the history, but the flavor is the same.
What's really fun about books like yours are that we get to take kind of one of these cultural icons, these legends, and see different aspects of who they might have been. And one thing that we start realizing when you're dealing with one of these legendary characters is that everything that we think we know is probably all manufactured, or most of it. These tall tales and legends grow and grow and grow, which for a fiction writer is actually pretty good, because there's so much legend around it anyway. Do you ever set any hard and fast rules about, okay, this is something that I won't touch, or this is something I have to really be careful to get historically correct, even though we're putting her and the other cast of characters into situations that may or may not have happened? Are there any hard and fast rules with writing fiction about real people?
That's a really good question. And there's, people have written about, Lincoln being a vampire. Okay,
right.
That's a leap.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that, but, there is an audience for that. It's just not something that I would enjoy writing about. But I do alter timelines, and I have embellished certain things about characters, maybe their background, where they came from. But I think the most important thing is to be true to my perception of the character's psyche, what they might have been feeling, their actions showed certain things that they did. For instance, Annie Oakley was raised Quaker. She was extremely modest, and if you look at photographs of her, she is covered from neck to toe. She didn't show any skin. She was very that was very important to her, to be portrayed always as a modest woman. So I wouldn't put her in something that was super revealing. I do have her wear stuff that is out of her comfort zone, like for a banquet, or, if she's going to a special party or something like that. But, so things like that, there are certain things that I don't feel comfortable taking license with, but there are a lot of things that I do, and it all comes back to, I think, to your point, even historians have their own bias on what happened. and what they record and what they heard or what they have studied, or, so it's an interesting question. And I knew going in the historical audience is a tough audience because these people are passionate about history. And again, though, when someone kind of confronts me with, oh, well, that didn't really happen, I sort of say, well, we're talking about Annie Oakley as an amateur sleuth solving crimes. That didn't happen. It's like, so it's, this is fiction. So it's a fine line, and everyone's entitled to their opinion, and there are people that get really bent out of shape if you take too much license. But to me, the most important thing is the story.
Right.
And if it's a compelling story, and you don't let, what you think should be the truth get in the way, and you just relax and enjoy the story, I think it makes it a different experience.
I agree. What is it about Annie's character that makes her a great amateur sleuth?
Well, she was smart. She was very smart. She cared a lot about people. She was, and I think in real life, if she had seen an injustice done, she would have wanted to fix it. And part of that came from my research into her. When she was an older woman, a story came out in the Hearst papers about Annie Oakley I think it was in Europe, selling, like, in prostitution or something like that in order to purchase cocaine. And this story went viral, and it was actually I think it was a prostitute in Europe that used her name. And so the story got completely messed up, and she spent something like 8 years in court trying to clear her name.
Wow.
She got all of the stories retracted. There was, I don't remember how many stories, but it was all over. And she got, I think, almost all but a few of them retracted. But it was a passion. Of course, this was her name on the line. But I thought, wow, that takes some intestinal fortitude to go up against someone like Hearst and, say this is not a true story, and just fight it and fight it and fight it. So I thought, she's into seeking justice.
Well, in that first book, you take us through a lot of Annie's history and a lot of with detours, of course. But the second book, Peccadillo at the Palace, the second Annie Oakley Mystery, you have Annie and the others from Buffalo Bill's Wild West show go on an excursion together. What was the motivation, the idea that to bring these characters on a road trip, so to speak?
Well, it actually did happen. They did go over to England in 1887 to partake of Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, and it was a big deal to go over there because they had to lease the ship from, I think it was from the Cunard Line, it was from the White Star Line, and they leased this state of Nebraska steamship, and they took over, all the animals, all the performers, all their equipment. And I was thrilled when I learned this because I had studied English history, British history for years. And I thought, what a perfect way to marry my, love of American history in with my love of British history and have, bring to life this real story of what their excursion might have been like. And so then then doing some research on Queen Victoria, I knew that there were some assassination attempts on her in her younger years. And I thought, wouldn't that be interesting if, they're on the way over and it becomes very clear that, someone is out to get the Queen. And in the meantime, while they're on the ship, her one of her assistants, she sent one of her assistants to America. This didn't really happen. I made this up, to escort the Wild West show. And on the journey over, he dies mysteriously. And at the same time, Annie's husband, Frank Butler, becomes mysteriously ill. So I had to give her a reason to really care about what was going on the ship and what might happen to the Queen. So I had to, bring in, a loved one, and to have that be her motivation for finding out what is going on here.
When you're using situations like this, the real situations, we know that they did travel to Queen Victoria's celebration. And how do you do research about it? Where do you start looking for sources to find out where they really might have been, the people they might have interacted with, and things that would be plausible to start crafting a mystery around it?
Well, there is a wonderful resource, the Buffalo Bill Archives, and I looked at a lot of articles on the Buffalo Bill Archives, and I think it comes from the Cody Museum. I'm not exactly sure, but there were just wonderful articles, Royal Visit to the Wild West. I'm looking at a couple of them now. And all these different writers wrote these different accounts of, what they perceived happened at the time. And so that's where I got a lot of that information. And then I just did a lot of research on Queen Victoria, on the situation that she had going on with Ireland at the time, and also the situation she had going on with India at the time, because there was quite a bit of unrest in both countries. And of course, she was the monarch and the Empress of India, and so she had control of these countries. And so I thought it would be interesting to bring in some political issues as well. So that's sort of, I don't really know how it evolved. It just kind of, I researched one thing, which led to another thing, which led to another thing, and it was like this. I was having so much fun,
Oh yeah,
trying
and you
to
find
make
you're
it all
like,
work.
And you're like, oh God, I'm going to use this, and then
Yes.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. You mentioned earlier when you were talking about your mystery series, the other series that you were talking about. You said that you had 2 books and then you were outlining a third. Are you a big outliner? And when you're writing a mystery like this and you're collecting all of this stuff, do you start planning out the book and making sure the pieces are going to fit together beforehand?
I do. That's how I start. I usually start with a very basic outline, make sure I have all my plot points that I want that's going to work. I usually know what the crime is going to be. I don't always know how it's going to be solved. And, that is the question that a lot of people ask writers, are you a plotter or a pantser? And I would say I'm a puzzler, because I get a basic outline, I start writing, but it takes me about 50 to 75 pages to know where the story is going. And so then I sort of adjust the outline as I go along, as I learn new things. And I do a good amount of research initially, but it always, like I said, as I get into the story, it leads to other things, and then I've got to research something else. And so it's kind of an ongoing research plan. So I think I'm a good mixture of both, because sometimes a character will say or do something that surprises me. It will just come out, and I'll think, oh, that's interesting. I really like that. How is that going to work? And it's really great when you get a story idea or you get a character that's actually coming to life and taking on a mind of their own, so to speak. And, then I just kind of go from there.
Well, do you, after this book, do you think there are more mysteries for Annie to get into?
I think there's a lot. I am actually working on the third book right now. It is Folly at the Fair, and it's when the Wild West show went to the World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition in 1893. And actually, Buffalo Bill submitted a proposal, and they turned him down. And so he rented the 15 acres right next door to Jackson Park, and he opened up his show like 3 weeks before the Columbian Exhibition, and he made a ton of money during that whole thing. And I thought that was really interesting. And I had read Devil in the White City, and I thought it was just such a brilliant book. And of course, I thought, oh, Annie's got to rub up against this serial killer. So I guess he was the one of the first recorded serial killers in history. H.H. Holmes, or William Mudgett, I think that was his name. And so, there's a character in the book that is very loosely based upon him. But so I thought that was a really interesting idea. And then Annie's sidekick, the reporter, Emma Wilson, is one of those characters who's completely taken on a life of her own. And I find that she's so fun and so interesting. I thought it would be really great to do a spin-off series with her stories, and this would be complete fiction. I might take an event in history and work her stories, stories into that. But so I don't know where it's going to take me. There's a lot of material there. There's a lot of potential for fun. And I don't know if I'll continue with Annie Oakley after the third book. I might, I'm not sure, but I would like to explore this secondary character.
I love it. Well, Kari, I'm a big fan of what you're doing. I love these books, and I think other people are too. The new book is called Peccadillo at the Palace, an Annie Oakley Mystery. Kari, if people are just learning about you and everything that you've got going on, is there a place they can connect with you online?
Yes, my website is www.kari, K-A-R-I, B as in boy, O, V as in Victor, EE.com. Oh, there's no dot in the middle of that. Sorry, just karibovee.com. And then I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Pinterest, Twitter. I'm everywhere.
Awesome. We're going to send everybody to see you. I'll put links to everything in the show notes. Kari, it's been so much fun chatting, and we're going to send everybody to pick up Peccadillo at the Palace. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
They made instant coffee and laid blankets over a pile of hay. He helped Kate pull off her boots. She volunteered for first watch, but Jason couldn't sleep. "Talk to me?" he whispered. Kate sipped her coffee. She sat silhouetted against the soft navy sky. A field of stars hung above her. The constellations peered in through the windows and slats. "How about a story?" "Sure. My mom used to tell this one. It's the legend of the Star Maidens." He watched her words as she spoke, her story illustrated by puffs of vapor that mixed with the steam of her coffee. "Long ago, a Mohican brave became lost in this valley. He'd followed a red deer deep into the woods, but the deer had vanished, and as twilight fell, he lost his way. He searched the heavens. He saw a bright star and followed it. It shone upon a clearing in the woods. Spook Rock lay at the center, emanating magic. And in the starlight, he discovered the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He discovered a star maiden. She was dancing with her sisters, and all 7 were naked." "Oh, really?" Jason whispered. 7 naked star maidens? Shh. Why do these things never happen to me? The brave decided he must take the star maiden for his wife, so he seized her and threw her over his shoulder, and she loved him for his courage. They married and had a son. Then what? Then it gets sad. The Star Maiden missed her home. She gazed at the sky every night. She loved her husband and her baby very much, but she missed her sisters, and she especially missed the dancing. So she snuck away one night and returned to the sacred rock, and she begged her sisters, please appear to me for one last dance. They came to her and took her into the sky. Kate's silhouette swayed. One last dance. It was wonderful. And when the dance was finished, they sent her back to Earth. She thought that she'd been away for only a little while. But that one dance had taken many, many years. She ran back to her husband, back to her baby, but they were gone. Her home was empty. The hunter had stopped waiting for her. He'd given up hope that she would return. He'd taken their child and had left with his tribe. One last dance had cost her everything, and she had no home at all. Jason could sense something roiling inside Kate, some brew of feelings that the story had stirred. He wanted to leap up, to grab her and carry her off, his Star Maiden and wife. She climbed up to Spook Rock. She heard no music, only wind. She died there of her grief. She dwindled and lost her star form. She became a will-o'-the-wisp, fluttering between the trees. And see that constellation? The Pleiades. Those are her 7 sisters, watching down from heaven. And, to this day, if a girl has lost her true love, she can go to Spook Rock and dance, and the Star Maidens will bless her. They'll grant her one wish, any wish at all, except one. They can't make her true love return.